Okay, we're live and everything's working and we love that. 3 years in and I still worry.
No, it's a miracle every time it works.
It's a miracle. It's just, and you're looking at the tech team. I know Mona's heard this before. It's just like in 2020, it's like, oh my God, we've got to figure this out. So yeah, so we figured it out. So welcome, Laura. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me, Julie.
Yeah, so excited to have you. And Mona, always great to see you.
So great to see you. Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Oh, this is going to be another great conversation and I just can't wait. While Facebook's letting people know that we're here and we'll gather a little bit of audience, I'll just fill a little bit of time, let people know what's going to happen. We're recording this, so if it's going to be on YouTube after we're done. So if you're watching this on YouTube later, there isn't a live discussion or a Q&A that you're going to have, but stick with us. It's going to be a great conversation. For those of you that are on here right now with us with Facebook, I'll be chatting with you in the comment section, and I will be putting in both Laura and Mona's latest book into the chat, into the comment section, so you can easily order that from Warwick's. For those of you that don't know, Warwick's is located in San Diego in La Jolla. Laura is coming to us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, I believe, this evening. And Mona typically would be coming to us from Syracuse, but she's actually in La Jolla today too. She's doing a writing retreat out here. So one of her favorite places to come out and write. So we love that. Kind of a great view there, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's amazing.
So if you're
flown out, I could have flown out. We could have all done it in person.
Oh my gosh, we weren't thinking.
I wasn't either.
We weren't thinking. That would have been so great. What a great conversation that would have been in the store. Oh my goodness. But this could be a great conversation via Zoom. So if you're in the San Diego area, we'd love to see you. Come by the store. If not, click that link, order the book. We'll ship it to you. No big deal. And so in that comment section as well, after Mona and Laura are going to talk for 30-ish minutes, something like that. We're going to hear some great things about Laura's new book. If you have any questions, put those into the comment section. We always love hearing audience questions and what you want to know from both Laura and Mona. So don't be shy and put some questions in there for us too. So without further ado, let me introduce these two lovely women, and then I'll go away and they can start their conversation. So Laura Zigman is the author of Separation Anxiety, Animal Husbandry, Dating Big Bird, Piece of Work, and Her. She has been a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Huffington Post. She's here today to talk about her latest book, which we were just talking about, but I didn't give you the title. It's getting some great buzz out there. I'm seeing it everywhere. So get your hands on it. It's called Small World. Joining her today is an author that's very dear to my heart too, Mona Awad. Mona is the author of Bunny, named a Best Book of 2019 by Time, Vogue, and the New York Public Library. It is currently in development for film with Jenny Koner and New Regency Productions. Congratulations on that. That's going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what they're going to do with that. She wrote 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, which received a ton of acclaim, and her most recent is All's Well. She teaches in the creative writing program at Syracuse. Like I said, that's where would be if she wasn't here in La Jolla with us. So with that, ladies, have a great conversation. We'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks so much, Julie. Thanks. And thanks so much to Warwick's for hosting us. I'm so excited, Laura, to get to talk to you about this book. I've been a fan of Laura Zigman's for a very long time. We're friends, but I've been a fan since your first book, Animal Husbandry, which I remember I cold bought in Toronto when I was a bookseller. And I remember I opened it up and I was just so sucked in by the voice. It was just so funny and so alive and just so intimate and direct and sharp. I just completely fell in love with it. And I was like, who is this writer? And so 5 books later, with Small World, I feel the same way. I love this book so much. Not only is it just a beautiful story and a beautifully told story, but it has that quality that struck me about your work from the very beginning. It's so alive. It's so funny. The characters feel so real, and it's heartbreaking. Even when it's funny, it's at the same time, it's that mix of feels that you do so well. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you about it. I think it's my favorite one of your novels, even though I love all your novels. So I guess maybe we can start with you reading a little bit, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Mona. I feel like Mona and I met, we did an event together on Zoom, and we became friends after that. And I'm telling you that I don't think I would have finished this book if it weren't for Mona, because we were on a very tight writing schedule, the two of us, and we checked in every day. So I feel like you're partially responsible for this book even being finished, but thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to read like a page. Don't panic. It's a gray January afternoon, kind of like today. It's a gray January afternoon when I pick Lydia up from the airport, the kind of day that always reminds me of how hard it is to live here on the East Coast in New England. When in the cold, wet shock of air in the open parking garage, she says about the weather, "Nice, great, I've really missed this." I resist the urge to apologize for it, even though it still feels like my fault, this freezing cold welcome home, a bracing slap across the face, which I can't help but think she kind of deserves for leaving me alone here for so long. She has 2 bags, a carry-on and a large silver metal case that she checked, and when I put them in the trunk, I compliment her on her light packing job. "Everything else is in storage," she says, pulling a thin, bright orange puffer jacket out of her carry-on for the ride home. "Brad was kind enough to offer to ship it once I get settled." "That was nice of Brad," I say. "Wasn't it? But then Brad's always been a nice person, much nicer than me." It occurs to me then that Brad was my brother-in-law for almost 20 years, and yet I have no idea how true that statement is. Who is Brad? Who is Lydia? Living so far away from each other made it almost impossible to know, and now it doesn't even matter. Divorce makes the past irrelevant. He's gone and she's here, and now, for the first time in years, probably since Louise's funeral 5 years ago, we're both in the same car heading home. I take the scenic route back from the airport, making sure to take Starrow Drive and then Memorial Drive so that Lydia can see what she's missed all these years, the sexy curve of the Charles River, the runners snaking alongside it despite the cold, the indigo sky, a color and texture only Van Gogh or Turner could mix. I park on the street in front of my apartment on the first floor of a midnight blue Victorian on a leafy street not far from Harvard Square. And on the way into the house, she stops, resting her bag on the brick sidewalk. She stares up at the sky and takes in a long, deep, cold breath, then exhales it in a big gray cloud. All the trees are bare, and the tiny bit of light that guided us home from the airport is fading fast. "Winter," she says, softly, reverentially, looking at me over her shoulder with an unusually sweet smile. Somewhere nearby, someone's fireplace is lit, and we can both smell it. I've kind of missed it. For a second, I step outside myself. My sister, who has not lived here in decades, is finally back, on her way into my apartment where the two of us are about to be roommates for a while. Suddenly, too late, I'm terrified. This could be a disaster. It likely will be a disaster. All the old wounds of childhood and beyond will definitely resurface, and then we'll fight, and then we'll be stuck together in the same house for who knows how long. And then she'll leave, and it will end badly, really badly. So badly that we might never talk to each other again after that. Whose idea was this? "I don't believe you missed it," I say. I said I kind of missed it, not that I really missed it. She pulls on her bag and follows me up the walk and inside the vestibule. As I lead the way, I think I hear her say, "I'm so excited to see your place again, but part of me is certain I imagined it."
So good. I love that scene. And it's so funny too, when you read it and when I was listening to it last night and she says winter and just takes it in, I was actually like, wow, I kind of actually miss winter too. Now that I'm out here in California, you reminded me how beautiful Massachusetts can be in the winter. But that's such a great like opening introduction to the sisters. So I guess maybe a question to start with is, what was the initial spark for the novel? What drew you to want to write this particular story at this time? And maybe just give a little bit more about the story itself.
Sure. So, Small World is about 2 sisters, 2 divorced, childless sisters who move in together as adults for the first time. Lydia lives on the West Coast, moved there after college, and Joyce lives in Cambridge. And I had this idea to write about these annoying neighbors that we'd had upstairs in real life. And my stuff is always a blend of real life and fiction. So I thought I had a sense that, like, I didn't know what my next book was going to be, but I knew I had a situation. I had an incredibly dark, annoying situation going on where I lived. And I thought, oh, I'll just write it the way it's happening, which is like, I was living with my husband at the time and my son and the dog, and we had these people upstairs. And then I thought, I don't want to write about a marriage. I don't want to write about a couple. I don't want to write about, I just did that, and I don't want to do it again for a while. And I thought sisters. And then I thought, what if my sister came? And what if my sister, who lives in California, who's lived out there, same as Joyce in the book, moved out after college? What if she came back? And what if we moved in together? And I thought the comic potential for that would be so great, because, sisters and siblings, and, you barely know each other in your adult years. There's so much, if you don't live in the same town or in the same coast, you don't really know each other. You visit. And so they, Joyce and Lydia have lived on separate coasts for most of their lives, adult lives. And oh, wouldn't that be funny? And then I thought, wouldn't it be really funny, because the pathos in their relationship would play out dealing with the people upstairs. And then I thought, I really wanted to write about my family. And this was a perfect way in, because I knew that once like a perfume, once those first few notes of sibling stuff burned off, underneath it was their childhood. And whenever siblings get together, if you have siblings, it's really quick. Like you have the thing, you're really happy to see each other, then you kind of bicker, and then it just becomes like a total regression fest where you're both like children and all that stuff. And so for me, that stuff that I'd always wanted to write about was the fact that I came from a family that had lost a child. I had an older sister. We had an older sister who died, but we didn't really know her. She was born with a really rare disease, and she lived in an institution she was 7 when she died. So she didn't really live with us. She wasn't a sibling that we knew, but it affected our family because it affected our parents. And so I wanted to kind of explore that in a very fictionalized way.
Right. Yeah. I was curious about that. And I know that you've talked about this before, but maybe we can talk a bit about that choice. Because initially, I think, right, you had thought about even this material, this stuff about your family, as a memoir, but you decided to go into the fiction. It ended up getting folded into a novel idea. So what drew you to fold it into a novel rather than to pursue the memoir?
I would say failure to turn it into a memoir. Most of what I do comes from some kind of failure in the other way, so then I do it the way that I do it. But for a really long time, I thought, especially after I wrote 4 novels, and I was kind of like, I didn't feel I was really getting anywhere at a certain point. I thought, maybe I'll just change. Maybe I'll write a memoir. Maybe I'll write nonfiction. Yeah. And I did. I wrote about 100 pages of stuff. Wow. And then I realized that there wasn't really a narrative, that it was very impressionistic, a lot of vignettes and memories that I had. And when I came to write this story, I realized, there wasn't enough active action in my personal story. Our sister, we didn't know her. And so I realized that for the purposes of a novel, you want to see more than something that's just happened off stage and that is very internal. Right. I just didn't want to do that. So I thought, well, what if, and I knew a family, I've known many families, but I knew one family in particular who have a daughter who has a lot of disability issues. And she's, the center of the family, and the family really just revolved in the best possible way around her. And I thought, wow, what if, it takes place in the 70s, early 70s, the novel. And I thought, what if that were our family instead? What if Cheryl, or what if in this book, Eleanor, lived at home? And what if their mother, Louise, it being the 70s when activism was really grassroots, whether it was the environment or disability rights, that stuff was really being embraced by the people at home. People just had support groups, and they met at home, and they did all this stuff and protested. So I thought, well, what if Louise was was like that. And she was just obsessed with including Eleanor and the idea of inclusion for the disabled. And then that really opened up a whole thing, which was really the emotional truth of our family, which was just that we felt excluded. We felt excluded from our parents' grief, and we felt kind of excluded from that stuff. But when if your sister is living at home and everything is about her, you would really feel excluded. And so the irony of Louise, their mom, fighting for inclusion, and then they feel really excluded, and also wanting to be really, careful and wanting to paint that picture of how gray that all is, like when parents are really doing their best, and my parents did their best.
Right.
And Louise is doing her best. And I didn't want it to be like Louise was some kind of monster or anything. It's just like she's doing what she feels is right. And there's always, if you're a parent, you're going to always do something wrong. If you think if you're doing the right thing in one way, it's going to have an effect in another way. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, what you're saying is that the fiction gave you a lot of like freedom to delve into stuff that was really personal.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a curious thing, because I know from reading your other work and from being friends with you and from talking about this stuff together, that you do draw a lot from life, and I do too, as a writer. But you go to these incredible places too, there's moments of like delicious absurdity in your work, and even surrealism. I'm thinking about the people puppets and separation anxiety, and like likening male romantic partner behavior to animal husbandry and evolution, like in that novel, which I just love so much. And so I just, it got me thinking, when you're writing, where do you find the line between the imagined novel life and reality? And has that line shifted for you over the course of your books? I'm curious about that, as somebody who like thinks about that too.
Yeah, I know you do too. And it's a really fine line, because it can get really absurd really quickly. I mean, in my own mind, I tend to be I obsess about certain things. I get really interested in certain things. And then I become and then they kind of like frame everything. Or I just feel like, to lighten whatever story, there has to be this absurd, but not too absurd. It's like you just said, it's very fine. You can't spin too far out of control, because then it's just not. I wanted, like with the people puppets, it was like, it's absurd. You can see them and they exist. I mean, people puppets exist. They're in Vermont. They came to my son's school, so I know that they're real. So part of it is like, they have to be real. I want them to be real. I know that I'm not completely insane and making something up. Like, I know, but I want to drop them into like a completely bizarre environment, which is like their house, and see what happens. And so with this, having the people upstairs doing what they're doing, and the poetry and stuff like that, there's always something that
poetry,
just so expands the story just a little bit.
Yeah, maybe we should talk a little bit about that. That's one of my favorite things about this book. And I know, Laura, that you find a lot of inspiration in documents, like everything from scientific journals to community message boards. And one of the things I love the most about Small World is that the main character, Joyce, likes to make these prose poems out of people's messages. So how did that come to be a springboard for you, and what drew you to making that a compulsion of Joyce's?
It's really funny. I think, as I've discussed many times in these events or whatever, I had writer's block for a really long time. And I write in a much different way right now. I feel like there's a blender, like a NutriBullet, or I don't do vitamin. I don't know I just see them, but I don't use one. But when I write, I often think now, with separation anxiety and with Small World and with the book I've just started, it's like a blender. And I put these things in because I know somehow, like with the people puppets, I knew they were going in there, but I didn't know why. And I didn't understand what they were going to be. And when I was starting Small World, I knew that the poetry was going to be in it, but I didn't understand why. or I didn't understand what it would mean. And the old me that wrote novels when I was in my 30s and early 40s would have had a kind of a caper aspect to the poetry. It would have been some kind of thing where it was like a thing with a thing and someone got caught posting. So Joyce gets really obsessed with these, it's like Next Door, but it's called Small World. And a friend of mine, I just, was on Facebook, and a friend of mine was a professor at University of Maryland. He's a really funny guy. And every now and then he would take from his Baltimore neighborhood listserv, he would take a post and he would just cut it up into poetry. He wouldn't change a word. And I was like, I love these so much. I wanted to just like eat them. They were so funny. And I knew I was going to copy that. So I went right on, I told him I was going to copy it, but I went right on Nextdoor and I started to obsessively, of course, troll the site. And I still get the daily or twice daily Nextdoor emails because I just love to go on there. And as you know, when you're writing, there's nothing better than procrastinating or like research. I have to research. So I was always going to go to Nextdoor. So if I was stuck, I would just go on Nextdoor and look at all the posts. And when I wrote the first draft, I turned it in and my editor was like, I love these poems. And I was like, me too. She goes, they're so real. And I was like, well, they are. And then I said, oh, well, they're verbatim from the site. Cause I had this feeling like I wanted them to be like this verisimilitude, like they're real. Yeah. They're absolutely real. And she kind of was like, oh, I don't think you can do that. I think you have to you can't copy them. So I was bereft because I loved them so much. But I did rewrite them all, but I managed to keep just a tiny line because there was always something in them that was the inspiration for why I picked them from the thousands of posts that I looked at. But I loved that Joyce was obsessed with this, and it was like her quiet time. And the way she grew up having parents in the living room coming for these support groups who were always crying about their kids and what would happen to their disabled kids, developmentally disabled kids when they were gone, like who would take care of them. And they were always she and Lydia were always kind of upstairs listening and absorbing that sadness and that feeling that there was no hope and no answers. Who can answer a question like that? And so she kind of loves Small World, the posts, and makes the poems because there are these little problems. Where's my cat? I don't know, but is it a male cat? Where's the best tailor, and who stole my avocados? And then there were lots of really, really sad, interesting ones that you find on Nextdoor or that she found on Small World, which is just people get on there and they just write these really long posts, which is not a problem, but they're lonely and they're very moving. And so some are really absurd and funny and stupid and they're great. They're so typically what we think of when we think of a neighborhood listserv. Someone's always complaining about something, and then there are this whole other layer of posts that, and she loves them because it's kind of like, oh, problem solved. These are little problems, and people are solving them for each other, and she kind of gets a sense of comfort from that.
Yeah, oh my God, I love them so much, and I love the way that they're throughout the book, and I love the way that they talk to the story because of the way that they're placed. They're so much fun. I think it never gets old. Like sometimes I'll just open it up and read one just because they're truly so wonderful. I just enjoyed that so much. So yeah, I guess thinking then about Joyce, do you want to share how her particular voice came to you?
That's a really good question. Every time I start to write, I think I just can't, I'll never be able to do it again. I used to have this when I had a job. Every time I started the next project, I was like, I can't. The fact that I'd done it, for 10 years made no difference. I was just like, and this too. And I had written a bunch of pages and sold it on that, but I didn't feel like I had the voice right. So when I was really struggling to get the voice, I don't know about you, but for me, it has to be that the voice has to sound exactly right. And so I generally write in first person. So I tried that, didn't work. It was like Goldilocks. It was like, no, that didn't work. Then I tried third person, didn't like that. Then I went back, forth with those two. And then I was like, second person.
Yeah.
So I wrote in second person and I was like, this is the best. I love this. And I know that people hate to read second person. I mean, that's the rule. Don't write a whole book unless you're Jay Mackin or even then. I like second person a lot. I have a high tolerance. I could read a whole thing, in second person. But so I was like, I'm just going to write the whole thing in second person and then I'll change it. And I ended up keeping, at a friend's suggestion, my friend Ann Leary, who's an author too, and she read a chunk of it. And she said, yeah, you have to change it. I mean, because I knew I was going to change it. And she said, but keep the flashbacks in second person. Yeah. And I love that because I really felt like that didn't just help with the voice to get me going, but it also, those second person present, I think they're in the present tense, just made it so much more real for me, those memories and those flashbacks for the backstory.
I was going to ask you about that choice because, yeah, I wondered about that. I mean, it's those past sections where we're with Joyce and Lydia as kids, and they're kind of moving through the world with Eleanor and with their mother, and just all of their feelings about Eleanor that are very complicated, the love, but also just, their conflicted feelings about their mother's neglect and their mother's attention. It's all so gutting, but it's so it's still so pleasurable and immersive to read at the same time. And so I wondered about the choice of second person and what it was like to see that world of story through that lens, and if it helped. And I guess you're saying that it did help. Yeah.
Yeah, it really did, because I mean, it was, I'm glad to hear that, because I mean, also you're my friend, so you would say that, but those parts were really sad, and some of them were grim, sad and grim. And I worried that there wasn't enough levity or lightness, because that is kind of really heavy stuff to read. And a lot of that was drawn from the pages. So I always say nothing's ever wasted, because the pages that I thought might someday be a memoir, I drew from those and I changed them quite a bit. I certainly didn't write them in second person. And there's a lot of stuff that's really fictionalized. For instance, there's a trip to the amusement park where they take Eleanor on a really hot day to this, the roller coaster amusement park and stuff. And they have to cut the day short because it's so hot. She's really uncomfortable. And, this is where fact and fiction diverge. But like, we used to go to this amusement park on the South Shore of Massachusetts, and every summer we'd go, and it was a big deal. And of course, our sister was dead by then. She never came with us. So it's a really imagined scene. But I feel like it was so easy to imagine, because I just kind of thought, and the parents in the book are very different from my parents, but still, I could just imagine what that feels like, because my sister and I really grew up feeling invisible in a lot of ways. And when there's something now called, and there wasn't language for it back then, but it's called well child syndrome. And it is what the well children in a family feel. They feel invisible. They feel neglected, they feel overlooked. And so their needs are often not, they're not the priority. It's the disabled child whose needs are the most important. I mean, for obvious reasons. And even if kids understand that, they still feel a sense of, annoyance. Like they're normal people too, they get annoyed or they feel upset. And so, there was just a lot to write about in those flashback scenes, and to be in a child's head. Most of those scenes are being written from the perspective of Joyce when she's, I don't know, young, 7, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's a really, or even younger, I think. And when they go to the camp, it's the same thing. It's like a real child's perspective, because and when I was writing it, one of my big concerns was I didn't want it in any way to be offensive. I wanted to make sure it was not offensive in any way, even though I didn't think it was. But the last thing, when you're writing something like this, you just would never want to be offensive in some way. And I thought for a while of showing it to friends who had kids with disabilities. And then I thought, it's not a parent's story, it's a kid's story. And so I felt very kind of okay with the fact that this was very much a sibling story, and it's very different from a parent's story. So
yes.
those feelings are written from a really young sibling perspective.
Yeah, and they're so honest. I think that's the thing that I love about it. And that's the thing that I love about your work the most generally, is that it's so honest. I don't know how you do it, but you always manage to strike this balance between being totally compassionate and yet totally eviscerating. Sometimes in the same moment. It's truthful. And it's like looking at all the sides of the truth. And the truth is often both at the same time, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so you can capture that. And the way what I love in the book and what is so pleasurable is the tension between Joyce and Lydia when they are living together in Cambridge in the present time. I love the handling of that. It's so funny and good, and also moving, and you know, there are moments of real heaviness there. So I wondered what it was like to write about that particular dynamic, and what was fun about it, what was challenging about it.
It was really fun, because, like I said, if you have a sibling, no one can push your buttons, especially
Right.
if you have a sister. Nobody. And like lots of people can push your buttons, but not like a sibling. I mean, you have all this history. What's so fascinating to me too is you grow up in a family, if you have siblings, and you are in the same family during the same time, basically, unless there's a big age difference. But with my sister and me, it was just 2 years. And your personalities are completely different. They can be completely different. You have a completely different sense of the family, different experience. Like that fascinates me. It's like we were both there at the same time, and yet we're very different. There's a lot we agree on for sure, but we have a lot of differences. And so I just love the idea that, when you get together with your family, it is just that first layer burns off, and then it's just like open season. It's just open season. Everybody regresses. When I guess it was over 20 years ago, I left, I had lived in New York. I'm from Boston. I had left and lived in New York for 10 years, moved to DC, met my husband, had a baby, and moved back sort of by accident, which of course wasn't really an accident, but I moved back to Newton, where I actually grew up, like one zip code digit away from where I grew up. And my parents were still here. This was like 2001. And I was so excited because I thought, I'm going to get this big do-over. Like I left as a loser, or in their mind, I was kind of a loser. And I came home, like I couldn't have moved back before because I didn't have a child or a dude. And so but here I was moving back, and I was published, and look at me, like I can now have a relationship with my parents. And like, they were exactly the same. They treated me exactly the same way. And I was exactly the same. I totally regressed. And they were just the same. And it was like not a do-over at all. But I just love that, because you think, you're going to move in with your sister. Joyce thinks like, oh, is she going to move in? And of course, she has that moment of like terror before it actually happens. But she's like, the fantasy, the delusion that we're going to be really close. And no, that's not what's going to happen. You're going to really fight and regress. And if you're lucky, you will rebuild. and they are lucky. They do rebuild. And most of us are lucky that we can do that. A lot of times you can't. But I love that sense of just like, you're talking about the pumpkins, but it's not about the pumpkins. You're fighting about what happened when you were 5 and 7. And so everything revolves really when they start to deal with the people upstairs. Their entire dynamic plays out through that, because Joyce, of course, is just really, really annoyed by these people, deeply annoyed. It's her home, and like these people and what's happening. And Lydia is like, at first she's like, yeah, this sucks. And then she's like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity for me to tell you how uptight you are, because I've been in California all these years, and you are so East Coast, you're so uptight. It's just noise, let it go. And so a lot of their relationship would just play out through the stuff and the triangulation that goes on, because that's what sisters do too. Like, oh, I'm going to be friends with this person. That's your friend too. And, so there was just seemed like so much to work with.
Yeah, no, it's so much wicked fun. And speaking of sisters and of wickedness, the book references Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which is a movie I love. And Small World is not a horror novel, but I wonder how that movie might have been a springboard, and if there were other movies or books that you went to for inspiration while you were working on Small World.
That's a really good question. Not really. I don't read a lot when I'm writing, just because I get that thing where some people don't read when they write because I'm a mimic, so I'll start to. But I made a whole bunch of reels because I was just like, I'm 60, I should learn how to make a reel, and so I did the whole thing with whatever happened to Baby Jane, and
Right.
it is just so funny because our sense of our collective fantasy of sisterhood is like Little Women, and and all the gushiness of being sisters, and of course you have your little spats, but like, oh, you're one big. No, no. It's not often always like that. So I wanted a little bit of the dark,
Yes. Yeah.
fighting stuff. Yeah.
It totally, yeah, it's there. There's definitely an undercurrent of it. One of the things I love about this book so much is the setting of Cambridge and more broadly Massachusetts and how it comes alive. It came alive so beautifully when you read that opening passage. And I know that you're originally from Newton, so I wondered, but you moved away and came back. And what degree do you think Massachusetts shaped you as a writer? And how did it inform your style and your storytelling?
That's a great question. I feel like being from here, I mean, I don't know what it's like to be from somewhere else, but I do know that being from Massachusetts and Boston, the Boston area, I grew up in the suburbs, but from a young age, like I worked at IHOP. I worked the graveyard shift at IHOP when I was a teenager. I don't know why, but I did. It was terrifying, but I'm really glad I did it. But I feel like so much of this area, the fighting against the weather, and people are nice, but they're not really that nice until you know them. And it's tough. It's a tough place. You can't just charm people here. You have to earn it. And even then, I mean, you live here part of the time. It's not an easy place. And what was really interesting was that when I grew up, and I don't really know because my parents aren't around anymore to ask, but the institution that I write about in the book is called Fernald, and it was in one town over, in Waltham. And what was really interesting was, we grew up and my parents stayed friends with all these families whose kids did not die, who were institutionalized, who were, either at the time called retarded. That was a term way back then.
Right.
And what was really interesting was in Massachusetts, every time you go to a supermarket, and it's to this day, there are developmentally disabled teenagers working in the checkout lines, bagging, and nowhere else that I've ever lived. I mean, I'll go to any supermarket any day of the week. And I love that. I just love that. I grew up seeing that. I grew up, having a sense that people of all kinds like that, we all exist and we coexist. And I love that there was an I don't want to keep saying they, but that they were integrated into, you'd see people, you'd see them, in the supermarket, you'd see, and I'm sure they did other things too. And I lived in New York. I don't remember ever seeing that anywhere else. And so that to me is like a big thing also for here. And everybody knows somebody. If you grew up in Boston, everybody knew someone who went, who had a cousin or a brother or an uncle who was a Fernald. Someone had a, and I won't use the R word, but that's what they would say. Oh yeah, I had a cousin. Yeah, Bobby was there. And so it was always like a thing. And so I feel like it's definitely integrated into my perspective on things.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, kind of moving into just like process sort of question. What was the process like for this particular book, and how do you see it sort of sitting in relation to your previous books and to where you're going next? Yeah. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it feels really different. When I wrote my first 4 novels, I mean, Animal Husbandry was written while I had a really full-time job in publishing. I had worked for Random House for 10 years as a publicist. And so I wrote in my spare time, which is like writing once a year. And so it took me like, 5.5 years to write that book or whatever. And then after that, I was able to write, full-time but my novels, they were always like, there was a plot and there was kind of a clever twist to it. That's how I kind of saw each one of them. And even though each one I loved writing in its own way and meant a lot to me in its own way and covered kind of an emotional terrain that I was traveling across at the time, it was a whole different thing. I saw each book as like a puzzle. I have to figure, like, and make it this really clever thing. And when I stopped writing for over a decade, and then I started to write separation anxiety, it felt the same in a way, because animal husbandry, I didn't have a contract and I just wrote it. And I never thought, I mean, I hoped it would get published. And then the other ones I had contracts for, and I had a deadline, I had to do them. And separation anxiety was another thing where it's like, no one was waiting for it because I hadn't written in forever. And I didn't even think I would get it published. And so I took my time with it. And it was a very different thing. I had pieces of it, and I'd written it once as a screenplay, and I had to, it was like, again, the blender. It was like, I knew that this was going to happen. And all these elements were in the blender, but I didn't know. And somehow it's like, to me, it's like, that is the miracle, that alchemy that happens when you're, and it happened with Small World. I had all the elements in the blender, and I had no idea what is going to happen. I kept, every night I'd be like, I have no idea. What does this mean? And somehow it just all came together. And I have a faith now that I can do that. Like, I'm starting the next one, and same thing. I have all these things in the blender, and I'm like, but now I'm not as anxious. I mean, I'm super anxious, but I mean, I know that I will survive the anxiety and figure it out.
Do you want to just, as a close, maybe, you don't have to if you feel.
I'll interrupt you. Are you going to say a little bit about the new one?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Because there's a La Jolla. Oh, you'll love this. There's a La Jolla thing. So, my obsession. So last winter, when the whole Ukraine thing started, I was like, I can't watch this. I can't take another thing. It's too much. I did watch it, but I couldn't. So I got very into the Kardashians, which I never was into ever. And my son is living with me now, and he would come home from work, and we would just watch episodes of the Kardashians, because they were switching over to Hulu. We felt we had to do our homework with their old series. So I of course got, like, it was repulsive and awful, but we were completely addicted. We watched about 4 or 5 seasons. That was enough. And then I of course downloaded. I was kind of fascinated by Kris Jenner, and so I downloaded the free sample of her memoir. And in the first few pages, she talks about, she grew up in La Jolla, and her grandparents had a candle store. And she said, there was a beautiful candle store, and they had religious candles and these candles. She go, but my favorite candles of all were the gloom chasers. And I saw that word gloom chaser, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in love with this word. What is a gloom chaser? And a gloom chaser, she then described, is a small glass votive candle with stained glass. And you put the candle in it and you light it, and it chases the gloom away. And also, it can be like you're chasing the gloom, like a gloom chaser, like a storm chaser. So I was like, that's my book. I have no idea what it's about. I just know it's called Gloom Chaser. And now I know what it's about, but it's really about a woman who is, starting the second part of her life. She's divorced, and she moves to Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is on the North Shore of Boston, at Cape Ann. And it's pretty gloomy. And she moves there in January, kind of start a new life. She becomes a driver's ed teacher, and meets some people there, and kind of her life starts there again. So,
oh my God, I cannot wait. I'm so excited. We've talked about it, so I'm really excited. And I hope that, in the meantime, Small World is fucking amazing. So very, very excited that it's out in the world. And I just can't thank Warwick's and Julie enough for hosting us. I love Julie and I love Warwick. So
it's so great. What a great conversation. I mean, I was making little notes the whole time. The next door thing was killing me. I mean, that is just because my husband does no social media at all. Zero, zip, none, nothing. I mean, I'm all over it. The one thing he does is freaking next door.
That's hilarious. That's like his version of social media.
Yes,
that's hilarious.
It's a version of social media. And it's just like, and it's just, but I never really thought about it. One of the things you brought up, though, which kind of makes me a little sad, I never thought of the loneliness of it. And that was just like, I kind of, as I'm getting old, I'm old. Yeah. As I'm getting older, and it's like it's like, oh, that is
the way to connect.
Yeah. So,
Weird.
I mean, I kind of I was poking him and, making fun, but it's just sort of like that really, for me, it was just like, oh yeah, you kind of got to think about that too a little bit. And I love this.
Just helps you improve your marriage.
You're a marriage counselor and didn't know it, right?
Right.
One more thing to add to the resume, right? But the Kardashian thing, God, I can't think of what because when my daughters lived with me, we were kind of I watched more Kardashian than I would like to admit to myself. And they've come by the store. They still come to La Jolla occasionally, the whole bit. It's a whole production. But Chris's mom owned, I don't think still does, a children's boutique in town.
That's right.
So there were still lots of La Jolla connections with the Kardashians there.
Yeah.
We do have one little question here. Christine says she actually grew up in Wesley, Mass. And moved to California right after college and never looked back. So she's got some connection with that, with the story.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, but she'd like to know, and you touched on it specifically for this particular book, which you didn't really have, but in general. So Laura, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Mona too with this question. What authors inspire both of you? So Laura, you want to take that one first, just in general, not specifically for the book.
When I was really young, I loved Faulkner and I loved Joan Didion. I mean, those were the two in high school that started me off. I loved Henry James a lot. I just loved him as a contemporary. I mean, I love Mona's work. Oh my God, wait till you read the next one. It is incredible. It's called Rouge. And I'm a huge fan of her work, and sentence by sentence. It's just incredible. And I love Tom Perrotta. I love the storytelling of Alice Hoffman. I just all that stuff. So those are my go-tos.
Yeah. Alice can write a grocery list, and I read it. Love Alice. Love Alice. Okay, Mona, what authors inspire you?
Well, I mean, obviously, I love Laura Zigman's work. It's just so exciting and alive to me. I just love how, anyway, I mean, I love it so much. So I'm I just finished listening to the book again, and I'm just so high on how wonderful it was. Yeah. I think, my favorite when I was starting to write was Jean Rhys. And she wrote Wide Sargasso Sea, but I like her other novels where she's just drunk in Paris alone. Those are my favorite. So Good Morning Midnight, and she's wonderful. She's got that voice that's just, she's funny, but she's eviscerating, and she's honest, and she's very intimate, and I love that combination. I feel like the writer is really trying to tell me a secret. That's my favorite kind of writing. So Jean.
Love it. Mona, when's Rouge? Is that what you're working on right now, where you're at?
No, it's done.
Okay.
I just turned in the copy edit. It's coming out in September.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting news. Because
I
think
you
that's
have no idea. You have no idea.
Well, is that the one that has the big La Jolla connection?
Yeah, it's all set in La Jolla. It's
okay. Oh, yeah, and that's got some really juicy stuff going on in that one, if I'm remembering what we talked about. Can't wait on that. Laura, Small World just came in. Did it just come out Tuesday, or did it come out last week?
It came out last Tuesday.
Tuesday.
The 10th. Yeah.
The 10th. Okay.
Yeah.
So are you kind of winding down your tour, or are you going to be other places?
Yeah, I'm in my bedroom. Yeah, I'm done. I went.
You're done.
It was perfect. I did a really nice event here in Cambridge. The world was not shut down this time. And I went to DC, and I went to New York, and then I got to come home. So I'm doing little things here and there, virtual stuff, and a few New England things.
Okay, perfect. So if people want to see you, they might be able to find you online somewhere too.
My events are on laurazigman.com.
Perfect. And your other book, where we was 2 years away from it, probably? Are we on a 2-year cycle with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. You too, Laura. It was wonderful meeting you. I hope at some point you can come out to maybe we have Mona, Alice, and Laura, and we do just this great woman panel event.
Yeah, that'd be great. Amazing. We fly out for Rouge, and we do it live.
Yes. I'm thinking I'm getting my wheels are turning there on that. So it was really nice meeting you. I hope that we do get to meet in person at some point, and if not, we're going to do this again. I'm hoping. Mona, you're in the I'm maybe hoping to see you in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
we'll get a date. We'll get a date going. All right. Well, everybody take care. Order the book. It was great having both of you, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you,
Julie.
Bye.